What we have here is a 2020 Corolla. Unfortunately, squirrels decided to make it their home. What she noticed first was that her left-hand blinker was rapidly flashing. So when I went out and checked it, of course I found that the headlight itself was not functioning at all. None of the little halo lights or the headlights, low beam or high beam, turn signal, this lamp was completely dead. So what you can see here is one of the connectors that goes to it, and then there are two more connectors that feed off of these 6 wires, and these 2 wires here are another connector. So there's a total of 3 connectors that go onto this lamp, activate all the lights in that one lamp. Now down here we've got the fog lamp. So as you can tell, we had to take off the whole front fascia of this car to get access to all that. Surprisingly, it comes off fairly easy. You're looking at a pop rivet and 3 screws on this bottom side, a pop rivet there, and then we took out 3 screws across the bottom. And here's one that goes right here, another one went here, and then another one in the very front before you got to the center air dam. It's this hole here. And then you have 4 across the very front air dam. Hopefully you can see that little hole right there. And then you've got another one off to center the opposite side, and of course over on the other side. Now the top you have to take off a few more, and we'll show you those here in a little bit. And once you get all that loose, it's just a matter of popping it loose at these points here. In essence, with the headlight in, you can't get in right here. So you actually have to start on the bottom edge and kind of pop it loose. It actually retains in 3 points here. Once you get those loose, you do that on both sides. This thing's going to practically fall off in your hands, minus the, once again, fog lamps, because those are a little tough to get to unless you cram your arm into here or you take the whole wheel well out. So simply just dropped it down a little bit, unplugged the 2 fog lamps, and that allowed the whole thing to come off. Now on this car, because it has the auto sensing in the front, this connector here connects into that. You want to, of course, take that loose before you try to take the bumper off. There's, as I said, I'll show you here in a minute, a couple more screws. But the headlamp itself has several screw points as well. You can see right here, that actually holds the front fascia on as well, so you have to take that one off to take the fascia off on both headlights. And then you have a 10mm headed bolt there, and another 10mm headed bolt here, and then 10mm bolt there on the side. So you get those off, and that headlight pretty much will slide right on out. It comes straight forward. You might have to give it a little jiggle, but it will come out real easy. Fortunately, it doesn't look like they've chewed anything else. I've kind of checked around. There's some other nastiness they decided to do, unfortunately, on the headlight itself. So we'll head over there and look at that, because I'm going to have to do some more fun there. Here's one of the mounting points, and you also have a large mounting point here for a screw, a small one there, and then another larger one there. And you can also see right there that clip that goes in underneath the headlamp. This goes in right underneath the headlamp as well, this piece here that I'm pointing at. And same thing on the other side. You've got that same point there and there. Those go in around the headlamp. And around the side, like I said, over there where the fender meets the front fascia, these are the little retainer clips that are going to pop in. And those there, you just get your fingers up underneath like this and just give it, you know, not a real rough jerk, but a little jerk, and it'll pop right out. You don't have to pry, don't have to get any wedges in there. It should just pop out for you. And of course your fog lamps, there's one. Of course the other on the other side. You can see where the screws, the little screw retainers, there, and then there's the others. Those are the ones I was pointing out on the lower section. So they just simply pass through those holes and then actually screw into the bumper, or the fascia. It's not really the bumper. Not really a whole lot holding this on. It's not like the old days when you had some rather large bolts that actually passed through sections and held the plastic on, and a lot of times the plastic was actually attached to the actual aluminum or steel bumper. But they've got away from that design on most cars nowadays. I think that kind of ended in the early 2000s or so. As I spoke of before, this is the actual headlamp. You're actually seeing the bottom side of it. Here are the actual male sides of the connectors. So you got the one side. This is the plug that we saw on the car that's still okay. It's not damaged. Whereas these are the two that had massive damage to the harness. And here are their pigtails that I've already done quite a bit of work to. Pretty much just had to get in there, save what little bit of wire I could, and then resolder them, so I didn't have to go hunt down these connectors. These are not things that I have on hand, and they can be somewhat pricey if you have to go buy a bunch of them. Now I do have some things like this that I have to keep on hand. These are just generic connectors with generic ends and water seal grommets. They're handy when you need to rewire something. Maybe you had to put one of those in between. If they chewed far enough back, like back here, I could have done something like that if need be. Unfortunately, the way they chewed, it made it much more cumbersome to do so. My grommets aren't in there as deep as I'd like, but they do at least have a couple of the ridges stuffed down in there, so it should still be watertight. This one here, you can't really see it. It's pretty tight down there. I don't think I should have to really worry about it. Now, of course, I had to write down what colors went to what, so that when I go wiring back, I can match it up with the body harness and get all that tied in properly. Same thing on the wiring. I don't have a plethora of wire. Had to actually go buy some. A lot of cars nowadays are using some really fine wire. Some of it's even down to, I believe, 22 gauge. If you ever have to do something like this, be ready for those kind of scenarios of having to go out and just find some really thin wire. It's a little bit cumbersome to work with because it's so tiny, so you can get the wire excessively hot real quick. So make sure you use good flux, good solder. A good controllable iron helps. This one here is okay. I wouldn't say it's great, but it's better than just a standard plug-in that, you know, just no control at all. These little octopus units, they come in handy as well. Help you to hold the thing in place while you solder it. Because as I said, once you start putting a little heat to these, that wire, even just a few inches back, is going to get real hot real quick. Having things like this to help hold things in place while you're controlling the solder and the heat makes it a lot easier to get those kind of things done and get a much cleaner solder out of it. Now, as I mentioned, we got other issues, such as here. So you can see this harness comes off and heads up to our two connectors here that are snapped in. So I'm going to have to push these back through and then pair them up and reconnect them. May have to wind up putting a little bit of a pigtail here to extend those wires out just a little bit so that I can manage it a little easier. Another spot where the squirrels have been chewing, and I do know for a matter of fact it is a squirrel. Actually, at least two of them, if not three. We had one die and fell out of the car, but we've got two more that we've popped the hood several times since, and they just scurry around. So we're going to have to do some sort of peppermint oil or something to keep them out once we get this all done. I've heard it works. I've tried sprays. They haven't seemed to really work. I'm going to try just a straight peppermint oil extract, I believe is what they call it. And it's a very concentrated peppermint oil. And I've been told that pretty much a paper towel, like one of these nice heavy-duty paper towels for the shop, just take one little bundle, kind of stuff it in somewhere, and put a couple, 3 drops on it a day for about a week or so, and that should run them off. Now we have the wires all put in and soldered back together. So I did wind up putting about a 3-inch section in between there. So I had to do a solder contact on each side. Once I passed those through, I had to mark down what I had so I can easily get it all matched back together. So now all I've got to do is button this up a little bit and go over and do the work over on the car. So now I just need to take these pigtails over and hook them up so that I can plug those back in once I get the headlight in there, and we'll be good. Here's the finished work. So we get everything soldered back in, all matched back to the proper pins. As I mentioned before, writing it down on the sheet, so I'll make sure I get them right. Now I will try to loom this back up the best I can. Unfortunately, they chewed up a bunch of the loom. I'll have to see if I can find some. I don't know if if I have any or not, but if I have some, I'll use it. If not, I will wrap it heavily with electrical tape. Make sure it's protected from the elements as best as possible. So right now it's time to get all these hooked back onto the lamp. Make sure everything works before I go through the whole process of wrapping it and buttoning it all up. There we are. Looks like everything is working. Got the nice little halo kind of swooshes. The low beam's working. Side marker's working. There we are, the high beam's working. Everything's looking good. Here's the other side that was not affected. Using that kind of as a comparison, if I don't recall what my lights are doing, should be identical on both sides, of course. So it looks like I got everything wired up properly. It's time to do all the looming and button it up. As before mentioned, you're going to have a bolt that goes in right here. But you've also got a pin right here. You need to make sure that snaps in place. Once that does, once you slide this in place, it should snap down, because this little retainer is actually sticking up a little bit. Just like this one, you can kind of see this one a little better. So they kind of stick up a little bit, and this one really snaps in. It's a real tight fit. Make sure you got those all snapped in place. You should be able to run them in. Get this held down before you actually start putting the facial on. That'll help give you something to snap to, of course, up here. As before mentioned, facial is going to snap in on the headlight in a couple of places. So you want to make sure this is nice and snug at those 3 locations before you go to snap that facial back on. This is pretty tough plastic, so you can be somewhat rough with it, but don't get overzealous, because these are not cheap. I don't know what they cost, but I guarantee they are not cheap. Headlights have gotten ridiculous nowadays with all the little light up pieces like here on this car. All those little things. If your cars have the special features with the LEDs and all that, them headlights go through the roof on prices. So just be careful, but keep in mind you can bump the plastic a little bit to get it to snap in, and shouldn't have to worry about it too much. Like always, it's plastic, so as these get older, you're gonna have to be that much more cautious with it. Just like I've talked about in my other Jag videos, that plastic gets old and brittle, especially right up here around the engine bay. It's going to get hot and cold, hot and cold, hot and cold. These more modern plastics also are designed to biodegrade much faster than the older plastics, so be prepared for that as well. I believe I missed this earlier when I was pointing out the bolts that hold the headlamp in. There is a bolt down here low. If I pan back out, you see it's towards this kind of thinner, more centered piece of the headlamp. So there's that bolt there, the bolt here kind of in the middle, and the bolt in the back, and the bolt on the side. Now all these are going to go in nice and easy because they're going right into plastic, so you don't have to tighten down real tight. These here also are not going to have a whole lot of movement in them, so there's not really a lineup that you have to do. Once you snap, like I mentioned before, this position in place, and you snap this pin in place down here, you're pretty much going to be centered. This point here, kind of in the center, does have a little bit of play, but down here in this lower one, kind of towards the inner part of the headlamp, once again, you don't have a whole lot of play. So there's not adjustments that you do to this headlamp like you would do on much older cars. These are going to have units inside that keep this all pretty in alignment. I do want to mention some safety points here. So you really don't want to work on this up here with the key on, because you have an impact sensor right here, and you have one on the opposite side as well, right over here. So if you're banging and clanging on this bumper while you're trying to pull it off, you might actually inadvertently set off the airbags. Once again, another kind of expensive boo-boo. So as we go back on with the facial, we're going to have to make sure that we get our fog lamps snapped in first. We got those on either side. And of course, our sensor in the Toyota emblem that picks up our cruise control and all that oncoming traffic. So make sure that you get those plugged in before you start bolting all that stuff in place, and then maybe not be able to get to those connectors as easy. Here we are, we're lightly in place, we're not snapped in. So I've got the fog lamps plugged in at this time. As you can see, I'm not quite lined up. Got a hole there for a screw. And I've got a couple of things down here. So this little tang is part of the front fascia, so is this. This is all attached to it. So you'll make sure you get those guided into their slots and over their screw holes. Same thing here. Another screw hole. Going to go into position here. And we've also, as before mentioned, you got these little clips. And those are going to be on either side, right there by the headlamp. And you're going to get these here to come up and snap in place. And this will be pretty much your last point of connection before you put your bolts in. So once you all kind of get it slid up in place, these here should be right over this groove, but they won't snap in until you give it a little bump. So this is inside wheel well, and that is actually a retainer that will snap the wheel well to the actual fascia once it gets in place. And here's where your little plastic pin is going to go in. That also needs to go underneath the fascia. So all this kind of tucks in behind the fascia. Once you get under here, you got these points to where it's going to screw together, but you also have to make sure that you get this air dam here that's part of the wheel well snapped in place. So this actually, if you notice, was kind of sticking out. You need to kind of bow that up and stick it in, and then we'll run our screw in here to help hold it in place. So several pieces that we need to make sure that when we get it all tightened up, it's all going to be in its proper location. So once it's there, we've got this all in place. All we've got to do is start screwing it together. As before mentioned, once you get that up in place, you just give it a light bop with the palm of your hand and it will snap in place. This here just going to kind of go in the groove, give it a little push, it'll kind of snap in there. It's not super tight, but once you get the rivets and everything in, it's not going anywhere. We're almost back together. So we had another bolt up here on either side. That's screwed down in the headlight. That held the fascia on. We got the middle bolt here, as before mentioned. We've also had the sensor, as I talked about before. That's for the active cruise and those kind of things. A little camera up here in the front, actually built into the Toyota emblem. So we'll make sure you get that all plugged back together. At this point, now we have this final piece. Just a little dam here. This snaps right in place, right over all that. Tucks in underneath the rubber. And you've got about eight little plugs you have to push back in. It's going to be these plugs right here. You see it's pushed in right now. That's actually how you release them. You push it down and then it pops out. So now I have to reset it and put them in and then push it back to the point where that's actually flush, not divoted in. And that'll hold that in place. So there we go. Everything is all snapped back together. Our lines are nice and flush like they were before I took it apart. Headlights all tucked in nice and neat. Got our cover on. Like I said, these should be flush. So that's how you get into those headlights and remove the front fascia so you can get to other things that are inside there. Hopefully you don't ever have to do it for the reason I had to do it. But that's how you get in there. We'll be putting a little peppermint oil, see if we can keep those little guys away.